Mom, my daughter asked me that night on her own birthday, her voice so quiet it barely reached beyond the space between us. Do you ever really see me, apart from what you expect of me? I had tried to mold love into something flawless, a masterpiece of devotion and order. But in our house, perfection was just another word for secrets, and a silence so thick it could kill. That night, the silence broke. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, trying to wash away the awkwardness of dinner with warm water and soap. Outside, it rained. Inside, I was rebuilding order, one illusion of control at a time. Then the phone rang, the old landline we never used anymore, its sound slicing through the air like a death knell from the past. A voice, formal and distant, spoke from the other end. Only a few words. Accident. Route 5. We're sorry. I can't remember if I screamed, but I remember the feeling. The glass cup, the one she had just used, slipping from my numb fingers. I remember the sound it made when it shattered on the tile floor. That sound wasn't just glass breaking. It was the sound of a future cut short, of promises extinguished before they could bloom. That sound killed the mother inside me. You might think this is a story about an accident, a random tragedy on a rainy night, but it isn't. The accident was only the ending. The real tragedy, the only one that matters, was me. I turned my love into a perfect cage, then wondered why my daughter couldn't breathe. I spent a lifetime teaching her how to excel and forgot how to listen to a heart that was quietly breaking. This isn't a story about loss. It's a confession from a mother who realized the truth too late. I don't tell it to ask for forgiveness. I tell it because I need someone to listen. So if you're ready, sit with me. Let me tell you everything, from the beginning to the end. And don't forget to subscribe so we don't lose each other along the way. The late afternoon was bathed in gold. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen window, dusting the table in a pale, powdery glow. I set out each plate, polished the wine glasses until they caught the light, and placed the apple pie in the center, the one Claire had loved since she was little. The scent of butter and cinnamon filled the room, carrying a peace I hadn't felt in years. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, whispering across the dry leaves. It should have been a perfect day, if only someone's heart had stayed warm enough to hold it. The sound of a car pulling up broke the stillness. Michael came in first, his shirt slightly wrinkled, carrying the faint, cold scent of cologne and haste. Claire followed, holding a bunch of wild daisies. Sam, as usual, was late, his guitar slung casually over his shoulder. "Happy birthday, sis," he said, his voice hoarse but warm. Claire smiled, a small, fleeting smile that barely existed. We sat around the table, 4 of us, though one seat was still not truly empty. Thomas, my husband, had been gone for years, yet I could still feel his warmth lingering at the head of the table. I used to believe that if my children just came home and sat together again, it would be enough. But that evening, the air was different. Quiet, yes, but the kind of quiet that makes you feel small. Michael talked about work. Sam tried to throw in a few jokes to lighten the mood. Every now and then, someone laughed, a short, polite sound that died as quickly as it came. Claire laughed too, but it never reached her eyes. I looked around the table, wondering when everything had begun to feel so foreign. Maybe it was because each of them, in their own way, was somewhere else entirely, even as their bodies sat here, in the warm light I had spent the afternoon preparing. "Mom, do you still make this every time?" Michael asked, cutting into his food, eyes fixed on his plate. "Yes," I said softly. "Your father used to love it." Claire murmured, "He loved it, but you made it for him, not because you enjoyed it." I froze. The candlelight trembled across her face, golden and unsteady, and I couldn't tell whether I was looking at anger or sorrow. No one spoke after that. The clinking of forks and knives filled the silence. each metallic note landing like the ticking of a clock. I forced a smile. At least tonight we're all here together. Claire's voice came quiet but sharp. Are we really, Mom? Sometimes people can sit close and still be miles apart. The words shrank the room. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and deliberate, like the clock hanging on the wall. Memories rose unbidden. Claire as a little girl, her hair tied in pigtails, sitting at the piano with trembling hands. I remembered motioning her to start, saying, "Go ahead, sweetheart." From then on, she always played, and I always demanded that she play perfectly. Maybe I was the one who taught her to hide her feelings behind her effort. "Did you ever really see me, Mom?" she said, eyes fixed on the cup of tea before her. "Beyond what you expected of me." The question fell like a small stone, but its echo reached deep. I wanted to answer, to say, "Of course I did," but my throat tightened. The ticking of the clock pressed in again, steady and cold. Sam laughed nervously and poured more wine. Michael cleared his throat and tried to change the subject. "I heard your counseling center's opening another branch?" "Yeah," Claire said, "but I'm thinking of taking a break." "Again?" Michael frowned. "You never finish anything." Claire looked up. "It's not quitting, it's stopping." "Call it whatever you want," Michael replied, his tone hard as steel. I glanced at them both, desperate to chase the heaviness from the air, but the smell of apple pie had turned sharp, almost bitter, and the candlelight flickered across Claire's face in a way that made me realize this dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a reminder that some distances can't be bridged with food, or blessings, or even a too-late embrace. I wanted to say something, but the clock spoke first, its rhythm even, cold, as if warning that some words, once spoken, only widened the silence. I set down my fork and listened to its ticking echo inside my head. Tick, tick, slow, rigid, and all too familiar. Claire met my eyes for a brief second, then looked away. "Mom, let me clean up," Sam said softly. "It's all right," I replied, trying to sound steady, though my hands trembled as I lifted a slice of pie. Michael switched the subject, as if rescuing the evening. "My firm's opening a new branch in Seattle. I might move there." I nodded, too afraid to ask if he really meant to leave this city. Claire gave a faint smile. "That far? What about Mom?" "She'll be fine," Michael said. "She's got Sam." "Right," Claire murmured. "Mom's always fine." It wasn't an accusation, not exactly, but her voice carried a quiet exhaustion that cut deeper than anger. I had no answer, only the cooling tea before me. Tiny bubbles clung to the surface, stubborn and still. The room felt like a half-finished song. Someone had walked away before the final note. The faint clatter of cutlery, the scrape of a chair, all of it blended into the hollow sound of people pretending everything was normal. Sam's fingers tapped lightly on the table. He'd never been good at silence. His reflection wavered across the polished wood, blurred, distorted. "Are you still playing guitar?" I asked, just to fill the air. He nodded. "Sometimes." "Your sister loves listening to you play." "I know." His eyes dropped again, hiding something unspoken. Claire's voice cut through. "Mom, I have to leave early. I've got a morning shift at the center." "You've been working too much," I said, my tone sharper than I meant. "You should rest once in a while." "I'm helping people, Mom." "And who's helping you?" The room went still. I knew instantly I'd said the wrong thing. Claire exhaled, stood up. Candlelight flickered across her face, half in glow, half in shadow. "It's okay," she said softly. "I just need some air." The door opened, and the night wind swept in, carrying the smell of rain and burning wood. She looked back once, her eyes deep and still, like winter water. "I'll be back soon," she said and closed the door behind her. A moment later, I heard her car pulling out of the driveway, slow, steady, fading into the distance. And just like that, I was alone, sitting in the wavering light of a single candle, its smoke rising in a thin thread that seemed to hold me to what was left of my family. Michael began stacking plates. Sam still hadn't lifted his head. "Mom," Michael said quietly, "don't worry. Claire's just tired." "Yes," I nodded. "I know." But something cold had already begun to spread inside me, light as smoke, heavy as stone. I looked around the table, the empty chairs, the untouched cake, the half-finished glasses of wine. Outside, the rain began, each drop landing on the roof with a rhythm that struck deep inside my chest. The night wasn't over, but I knew it wouldn't pass quietly. Something was leaving us, softly, invisibly, as if every memory we shared was being washed away, one drop at a time. I turned off the stove, cleared the table. The candle went out, leaving behind only the faint, bitter scent of burnt butter and apples. In the corner, the clock went on ticking, steady, cold, and indifferent, as if even time knew how to stay silent when a human heart begins to tremble. A few days after the birthday dinner, the house still carried the scent of apple pie, sweet, fading, and tangled with the chill of last night's rain. Michael suggested we take a family photo. "For fun," he said, his tone brisk and certain, as if nothing had happened at all. I agreed, not because it sounded fun, but because some part of me wanted to believe that things could still look normal, at least in a photograph. That afternoon, the living room was bathed in a honey-colored light. I drew the curtains halfway to soften it, then adjusted the vase of wild daisies Claire had brought on her birthday. The petals were already curling at the edges, but I couldn't bring myself to replace them. Michael set up the tripod, checked the lens, and straightened everything with his usual precision. "Mom, you stand in the middle, Claire on the right, Sam on the left." We took our places. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. Claire clasped her hands together in front of her, eyes focused somewhere far away. Sam looked down, tapping his foot in that gentle, rhythmic way he always did. I forced a smile, hoping they would follow, but the air between us felt like a stretched fabric. One pull too tight and it would tear. "All right," I said softly. "Ready? 1, 2... "Wait," Michael interrupted, raising his hand. "The light's too harsh." He adjusted the lamp, angling it slightly. The golden glow shifted and landed across Claire's face, turning her eyes somber, as if it had caught her in the middle of a memory no one else could see. I saw something change in her gaze then. Something slipped away. Maybe faith. Maybe hope. I wanted to reach out, take her hand, whisper something tender, but I didn't. I was afraid. Afraid to disturb the fragile stillness we were all pretending to keep. "Smile, sweetheart," I murmured. She didn't look at me. Michael added, half joking, "Come on, Claire. Just one smile." Her lips pressed together, shoulders trembling slightly. And in that instant, I realized how many years I had spent telling her, "Be strong, do better, keep going," without once asking if she was tired. When I pressed the timer, the small light blinked, 3 slow flashes before the shutter. "Ready?" I asked. Sam nodded. Michael leaned forward slightly. Claire stood motionless. "Smile," I said again, barely above a breath. She lowered her head, her hair falling over half her face. The light slipped across her cheek, thin, fleeting, like the trace of a memory. Then came the click. Just a moment, but I knew the smile never made it into the frame. When I looked at the photo later, it felt as if the three of us were standing close in one world, while Claire was standing in another. One where the light didn't warm, it only revealed the sadness beneath.
Michael straightened up. "All right, that's it," he said, the words landing like a full stop. He checked the pictures quickly, adjusted the lens, then folded up the tripod with the calm of someone finishing a small, unimportant task. Claire sat down, rubbed her wrist, and stared out the window. Sam picked up his guitar, reconnected the loose cable, and moved quietly, as if soothing himself through the silence. I gathered the half-empty glasses. The room was awash in amber light crawling up the walls, stretching our shadows into warped, uneven shapes. Claire's voice came softly. "Mom, maybe we shouldn't take pictures anymore." "Why not?" I asked. She looked down, her voice barely audible. "Because I don't feel real in them." Her words froze me. I wanted to laugh, to tell her, "Every picture is a lie. It's just a memory, that's all." But the words wouldn't come. Maybe because I knew Claire wasn't talking about the photograph. She was talking about her life. I sat down beside her, though I didn't reach for her hand. Between us was a space so small it could have been air, yet wide enough to keep us apart. I said quietly, "A photo is just a photo, Claire." She looked at me, her eyes sad, but no longer angry. "I know. But sometimes, Mom, people feel more real in pictures than they do in life." I didn't answer. The ceiling light flickered once before settling. Michael walked by, placing the freshly printed photo on the table. "Here, take a look," he said. "It's not bad." I picked it up. The light glared off the glass, softening the surface, but I could still see it clearly. A faint smile, and a small gap between our faces. Michael stood stiffly, shoulders tense. Sam faced the camera, trying to hide a polite, uncertain smile. And Claire? Her head tilted, her gaze lost somewhere outside the frame. The space between her and me, barely there, was still unmistakable. I found myself wondering how a camera could capture what I had spent years refusing to see. "It's a good one," Michael said. "I'll print a few copies." I nodded. "Sure, I'll take it to get developed." Claire said nothing. She looked at the photo, then gently pushed it back toward me. "I don't need my copy," she said. I tried to sound light, casual. "One day you'll want to look at it again." "Maybe," she said, "but not now." She stood, grabbed her coat, and walked toward the door. It closed behind her with a soft click, and the wind slipped through the narrow gap, carrying the smell of rain. The photo lay on the table. Sunlight from the window fell across it, dividing the image with a pale band of light. I reached out and touched the frame. It was cold and distant. That night I placed the photo on the kitchen shelf. The reflection of the lamp cast a thin, misty glow over it. I brewed some mint tea, the scent faint but steady, and stared at my own face in the photograph. I looked like someone trying to remember how to smile. I didn't know then that it would be the last photo. Didn't know that a few nights later, the chair where Claire had sat would remain forever empty. Didn't know that I'd look at that picture every morning, like a ritual, a way to hold on to what was already fading. Outside, the rain began to fall, slow and even, tapping gently against the roof. The light caught the frame once more, illuminating 4 figures standing close together, but only one of them, it seemed, had already begun to step out of the picture. Rain. The sound fell against the tin roof in steady rhythms, like someone tapping gently on the edge of my memory. I stood by the sink, warm water running over my hands, the kitchen light casting a pale gold shimmer across the stream, soft as breath. the faint scent of soap mixed with the lingering aroma of apples from the birthday pie. The house was so still, I could hear the rain weaving through the ticking of the kitchen clock, every beat slow and cold. Claire had just said she was going out. "One of my former patients needs help. I won't be long," she'd said, pulling on her coat and searching for her keys. I hadn't asked for more details. I should have asked. I should have said, "Wait until morning, sweetheart." But instead, I only said, "Be careful, the roads are slick." "I know, Mom," she'd replied with a small smile, one so faint it could have been just the reflection of light in a puddle. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, and then there was only the sound of rain and wind pushing through the cracks. I stood still for a few seconds, listening to the car engine start, fade, and disappear before returning to the sink. The water was still running, steady and oblivious, as if the kitchen itself didn't know someone had just left. I'd always loved the rain. It made the house feel less empty, but tonight it sounded different, heavier, deeper, colder. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands, and looked around. The gray scarf Claire had left on the chair, a half-empty cup of tea, the unsteady glow of the kitchen light flickering on the wall. Something uneasy crept through the rhythm of the rain, quiet but certain. Then the phone rang. The sound sliced through the night, sharp, clean, merciless. I wiped my hands on my apron and reached for the receiver. "Mrs. Hayes?" The voice on the other end trembled, rough and distant, broken by the static of a radio and the wind. "Yes, this is she. This is Officer Raymond from the City Police Department." There was a pause. Then, "There's been an accident on Highway 5. I gripped the edge of the counter. My heart pounded in strange, uneven bursts. "What car?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign, as if it didn't belong to me. "A silver sedan, registered under the name Claire Hayes." No other sound followed, just the rain, tapping against the roof, slow and cold, like the heartbeat of someone watching the world shatter and finding no breath left to cry out. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, not knowing how long I'd been standing there. The words "registered under the name Claire Hayes" echoed over and over inside my head, like a broken recording caught in an endless loop. My lips parted, but no sound came. My other hand still held a glass, the one she'd used earlier, until it slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the tile. Glass. Breaking. The sound rippled across the kitchen, merging with the rain outside. It was sharp, cold, and cruel enough to jolt me back into myself. I knelt down, staring at the shards scattered across the floor, the golden light catching on their edges like cracks in memory. A drop of water, or maybe a tear, I couldn't tell, fell among them and disappeared. I tried to pick up the pieces, but my hands were shaking too hard. My thumb brushed a sharp edge, hot, stinging, a trace of blood, but I barely felt it. There was no pain, only a hollow stillness spreading inside me. Maybe true grief doesn't begin with crying. Maybe it begins with the silence that follows after everything has already fallen apart. I looked up. The rain was still falling, heavier now, denser, as if the whole sky was trying to pour itself down just to fill this emptiness. I stepped out onto the porch without a coat. The cold air slapped against my skin, sharp, stinging, but real. Out on the road, the streetlights blurred behind a curtain of water. I don't remember how I ended up there. The rain erased everything, boundaries between the porch and the yard, between the rain and my tears. I heard the wind whistle through the pines, the sound carrying like a distant voice, faint, uncertain, calling through the endless storm.
I lifted my eyes toward the darkness where Highway 5 stretched toward the foot of the hill. Everything was still. Too still for a night that had held an accident. I could see it in my mind. The car, headlights slicing through the downpour, the tires slipping across wet asphalt, and Claire, my daughter's eyes wide open against that blinding light. Part of me refused to believe it. Another part already knew. I didn't need anyone to tell me. The shattered glass in the kitchen had already done that. Rain struck my face, salty, cold. I wiped at it, but the tears and the rain had long since become one and the same. I stood there for a long time, staring into the thick blackness ahead until my legs went numb. A thought flickered through my mind. Maybe she was only hurt. Then another, deeper, truer. Maybe I had lost her. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked shut. Only the rain spoke for me, each drop hitting the wooden porch like a slow heartbeat, steady and hollow, a sound of farewell. And when thunder split the sky, I knew a part of my heart had shattered with that glass. No other sound filled the night, only the rain, the dim kitchen light, and the absence of my daughter. An absence so heavy I could almost hear it breathe. 2 days later, the rain had stopped. The sky was a pale gray, like a blank sheet of paper, and the house sat in its own kind of silence, the kind that comes when someone is holding back tears. I brewed a pot of tea but never drank it, letting the steam fade into the air. On the table lay the family photo from the birthday. 4 people, but only 3 smiles. I brushed my fingertips across the glass, tracing Claire's face before pulling my hand away, afraid to touch something that no longer existed. Upstairs, I opened her bedroom door. The room still carried her scent, as if she'd only stepped out for a moment. Soft light filtered through the curtains, falling over the bed, the desk, the jacket slung over the back of a chair. On the shelf were the psychology books she loved, and a few loose notes. Healing starts when we listen. The handwriting, round, neat, so unmistakably Claire. I stood there for a long time. Every corner of that room held a memory. The citrus oil diffuser she turned on every night, the tiny cactus by the window, the wooden frame she once said, "Mom, I'll change that photo, it's too old." But she never got the chance. I began tidying the room, or maybe I was searching for a piece of myself among the remains of her life. Every object I touched tightened something in my chest. An open notebook, a pen that had rolled off the desk, a silver bracelet left unfastened. I folded her blanket, smoothed the pillowcase, listening to the dry rustle of the fabric. When I pulled open the second drawer, I saw an envelope, cream-colored, slightly wrinkled, the edges faintly marked by her fingertips. In the upper corner, small and neat in her familiar handwriting, "To Mom." I froze, my hands suspended midair, my breath caught, slow and heavy. I lifted the envelope, sat down on her bed, my palms damp with sweat. There was no stamp, no address, only that simple line, like something that hadn't yet found the courage to be spoken. I loosened the flap carefully. Inside was a single folded page. The handwriting tilted slightly, a faint tremor in the lines. "Mom," the first word, ink pale blue, smudged in one spot like a water stain. For a second, I could almost hear her voice inside each letter, soft, steady enough to make my heart tighten. She had written, "Mom, do you ever get tired? I do, but I've never said it because I'm afraid of disappointing you. In this house, there's always sound. The kitchen, the clock, the clinking of dishes, but never your real voice. Maybe you talk a lot, but it's always to your worries, not to me." I read slowly, each word brushing against my skin, leaving a cold trace behind. Then the next lines. "I live among sounds you don't hear. The sound of me knocking, of me trying to speak, of me stopping mid-sentence. You're here, but it feels like you're behind glass. I set the letter down on my lap and looked around the room. Everything was unbearably still. I realized, maybe for the first time, that I had never truly listened to my daughter, only to my own echoes, expectations, reminders, all the things I mistook for love. A breeze drifted in, stirring the curtain. Light spilled across the letter, making the words seem to breathe again. I touched the edge of the paper. The ink was dry, but the ache inside it still felt wet. I didn't finish reading. I couldn't. I only whispered inside my chest. Claire, if only I had listened. Just a little sooner.
2 days later, the rain had stopped. The sky was a pale gray, like a blank sheet of paper, and the house sat in its own kind of silence, the kind that comes when someone is holding back tears. I brewed a pot of tea but never drank it, letting the steam fade into the air. On the table lay the family photo from the birthday. 4 people, but only 3 smiles. I brushed my fingertips across the glass, tracing Claire's face before pulling my hand away, afraid to touch something that no longer existed. Upstairs, I opened her bedroom door. The room still carried her scent, as if she'd only stepped out for a moment. Soft light filtered through the curtains, falling over the bed, the desk, the jacket slung over the back of a chair. On the shelf were the psychology books she loved, and a few loose notes. Healing starts when we listen. The handwriting, round, neat, so unmistakably Claire. I stood there for a long time. Every corner of that room held a memory. The citrus oil diffuser she turned on every night, the tiny cactus by the window, the wooden frame she once said, "Mom, I'll change that photo, it's too old." But she never got the chance. I began tidying the room, or maybe I was searching for a piece of myself among the remains of her life. Every object I touched tightened something in my chest. An open notebook, a pen that had rolled off the desk, a silver bracelet left unfastened. I folded her blanket, smoothed the pillowcase, listening to the dry rustle of the fabric. When I pulled open the second drawer, I saw an envelope, cream-colored, slightly wrinkled, the edges faintly marked by her fingertips. In the upper corner, small and neat in her familiar handwriting, "To Mom." I froze, my hands suspended midair, my breath caught, slow and heavy. I lifted the envelope, sat down on her bed, my palms damp with sweat. There was no stamp, no address, only that simple line, like something that hadn't yet found the courage to be spoken. I loosened the flap carefully. Inside was a single folded page. The handwriting tilted slightly, a faint tremor in the lines. Mom, the first word, ink pale blue, smudged in one spot like a water stain. For a second, I could almost hear her voice inside each letter, soft, steady enough to make my heart tighten. She had written, "Mom, do you ever get tired? I do, but I've never said it because I'm afraid of disappointing you. In this house, there's always sound. The kitchen, the clock, the clinking of dishes, but never your real voice. Maybe you talk a lot, but it's always to your worries, not to me." I read slowly, each word brushing against my skin, leaving a cold trace behind. Then the next lines. I live among sounds you don't hear. The sound of me knocking, of me trying to speak, of me stopping mid-sentence. You're here, but it feels like you're behind glass. I set the letter down on my lap and looked around the room. Everything was unbearably still. I realized, maybe for the first time, that I had never truly listened to my daughter, only to my own echoes, expectations, reminders, all the things I mistook for love. A breeze drifted in, stirring the curtain. Light spilled across the letter, making the words seem to breathe again. I touched the edge of the paper. The ink was dry, but the ache inside it still felt wet. I didn't finish reading. I couldn't. I only whispered inside my chest. Claire,
If only I had listened, just a little sooner. The morning after the funeral, the house returned to its familiar silence, but this time, silence no longer meant peace. I brewed a pot of tea, set it on the table, then stood by the window. Dew clung to the window pane, glimmering as if it still didn't know what had happened. No more Claire's footsteps on the stairs. No more her voice calling, "Mom, I'm heading to work!" Only the faint breeze slipping through the cracks, stirring the emptiness she left behind. I walked through the living room where the old piano still sat, silent, like someone waiting to be called by name. On the stand lay a half-written score, the paper slightly curled, one corner held by a strip of yellowed tape. I recognized her handwriting, round, even. But some notes had been scratched out, as if she herself wasn't sure what she wanted to hear. I touched the edge of the paper, dust rose into a thin haze. This wasn't just any piece of music. It was the unfinished composition her father had once written years ago. Thomas used to sit right here, and Claire, still small then, would perch beside him, her feet not yet reaching the floor. I remembered him teasing, "One day, you'll finish this melody for me." And she had nodded, eyes shining like Christmas lights. She'd once promised me, "When I finish it, Mom, we'll play it together." I sat down on the bench, my palms trembling. The keys had yellowed with time, a few chipped and uneven, just like how I felt, worn, fragile, and about to crack. I placed my hands on the keys, trying to remember how she used to play. My fingers were heavy, clumsy, but I pressed the first note anyway. The sound came out warped and dry, as if the piano itself had lost its voice. I closed my eyes, imagining Claire's hands gliding over the keys, light, quick, effortless, like breathing. In memory, I could still hear her laugh. "You're too slow, Mom. Let me show you." And I'd laughed back, "You've always been better than me." Now there was no one left to correct me. I kept playing. Note by note, the melody stumbled along, uneven as a road that's lost its path. I repeated the phrase, trying to find the rhythm, but my hands faltered. When I reached the final note, the sound broke, off-key, sharp, like cold metal crying out. The wrong note echoed, then dissolved into the air. Silence returned. I looked down at my hands, fingers trembling, slick with sweat. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from fear, maybe both. On the stand, the unfinished sheet still lay open, the last line dangling mid-measure, like Claire's incomplete sentence in the letter. Outside, the wind rose, tugging at the white curtain. I stayed there, my hands resting on the keys, too afraid to press another, afraid that if I kept playing, I might shatter the only sound still connecting me to her. I sat still before the piano, unmoving. The late afternoon light slanted through the window, streaking across the wooden floor. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps. Sam stood there. I didn't turn around, but I felt his hesitation in the way he breathed. "She said she'd finish it next week," he murmured, his voice rough, like someone who'd walked a long way back. I nodded, eyes fixed ahead. "I know." In the faint reflection on the piano's gloss, I saw him, taller now, thinner, quiet in the same way I was. He stepped closer, placed a hand on my shoulder, so light it barely felt real. That faint warmth seeped through the fabric of my sweater, and for a moment I wanted to say something, but my throat tightened. I wanted to ask if he blamed me, if he thought this was my fault, but my lips only moved, no sound came out. Instead, I pressed a random key. The note came out low, dull, short.
I let out a small laugh. It sounded like a cry held back. Just one fragile sound, but enough to make Sam lower his head, hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes avoiding mine. We sat there for a long time, suspended between light and shadow. Outside, the rain began again, the first drops tapping against the window frame, slow and uneven, then growing steadier, their rhythm blending with our own breathing. I thought I could almost hear Claire's laughter somewhere among the keys. "You played it wrong, Mom. Let me fix it." Sam whispered. I miss that sound. "I do too," I said. I reached for the sheet of music on the stand, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the desk drawer. Every movement was deliberate, gentle, as if one careless touch might wake something that should remain asleep. "Do you want to keep it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Leave it there, until I'm ready." I nodded, then closed the lid of the piano. The soft thud of wood meeting wood echoed faintly, round and sad. We looked at each other without speaking. In Sam's eyes, I saw the reflection of the piano, the instrument that had witnessed both our childhood joy and our grief. I stood up, stepped away from the bench, but turned back one last time. The sheet music rested quietly inside the drawer, the closed lid above it like a small gravestone for something unfinished. From that day on, no one touched the piano again. In the mornings, sunlight stretched across the keys, dust gathering like a veil of mist. At night, the moonlight poured through the window, casting the piano's shadow on the wall. It looked like the silhouette of someone bowing their head. That melody was never played again, not because we forgot it, but because each time we thought of lifting the lid, we were afraid to hear that same sound, the warped, uneven rhythm, like my heartbeat ever since the day Claire left. Each night I passed by, my hand brushed lightly over the polished wood. The cold still lingered there, like a memory that refused to fade. Maybe one day I'll be brave enough to open it again, to play just one note, only one, to see if silence, too, can take the shape of music. But not today. Today, I simply sat on the sofa, gazing at the old piano in the amber light of dusk, and whispered, "Sleep well, my love. Your song is still here." The afternoon was cold, the sky heavy and gray as if about to break into rain. The dim light outside seeped through the curtains, spreading a dull silver wash across the kitchen floor. I sat at the table, folding documents for the memorial fund in Claire's name. The sound of my pen scratching paper was dry and hollow, like the faint heartbeat of something that had already stopped. The door burst open. Michael stepped in, his shirt still buttoned, tie loosened, face drawn with the exhaustion of someone who had spent the whole day fighting the world. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, without preamble. I nodded. "Sit down, I'll make tea." "No tea, Mom." His voice was low, restrained. I looked at my son, broad shoulders, tense posture, eyes carrying the weight of something that had been waiting too long to surface. He dropped a stack of papers onto the table. "I found the letters Claire wrote to you." I froze. "What letters?" "The ones in her box. You've read them, haven't you?" I stayed silent. That was answer enough. Michael inhaled sharply, fists tightening. "You made her feel like she was never enough," he shouted, his voice breaking through its own restraint. I stepped back, the words hitting exactly where I had tried not to look for months. "What are you talking about? I just wanted her to try harder." "To try herself to death, Mom?" His palm slammed down on the table, a sharp, cracking sound. "She spent her whole life trying to earn a single word of approval from you. Do you even know how tired she was?" I rose from my chair, but kept my voice even. "Michael, I never forced her. I just wanted you all to have better lives." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "You call that love? You don't see it, do you?
Everything around you has to be perfect. The meals, the house, the words that come out of your mouth. There's no room for mistakes, no room for weakness. I turned away, hiding the tremor in my hands. I did all of it for this family. No, Mom, he said, his voice rough and breaking. You did it to hold on to your image of control. You couldn't stand the thought of falling apart. But Claire, all she ever needed was for you to hold her, just once, without telling her what to fix next. The words landed between us, heavy as iron. I wanted to say enough, to stop this before it cut deeper, but I couldn't. Guilt and defense tangled together inside me, creating a pain that had no clear name. I met his eyes. You don't understand. Being a mother isn't easy. When you lose someone you love, you'll do anything to hold on to what's left. And holding on means suffocating everyone around you? Michael's voice cracked, his eyes red. We stared at each other, two people standing on opposite sides of the same grief, neither willing to step back. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and long, like the breath of a storm about to break. From the top of the stairs, Sam's voice cut through the air. Stop it! Both of you! His voice broke, part anger, part fear. Michael and I turned at the same time. Sam stood there, hair disheveled, t-shirt wrinkled, his eyes wide with exhaustion and panic. Claire's gone, he said, trembling. And now you're both doing the same thing, killing each other with words you'll never be able to take back. I stood still. So did Michael. Only the sound of rain began to fall, soft at first, steady after a while, as if to remind us that the storm wasn't only outside. It had already begun inside this house. After Sam's outburst, silence descended so heavily that it seemed to press against the walls. None of us spoke. The air grew thick, as if every breath might shatter the fragile distance hanging between us. I glanced at Michael, his head bowed, his hands trembling slightly. Sam lingered on the stairs, his shoulders rising and falling with each shallow breath. The silence that followed was colder than the rain on the night Claire died. At least that rain had rhythm, had sound, had life. This silence was dense and airless, stretching between three people who used to be a family. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and hollow, knocking against the wooden floor. None of us met each other's eyes. We all looked away, afraid of finding ourselves reflected there. I walked to the kettle, its faint whistle breaking the stillness. I turned off the stove. The boiling water hissed for a few seconds more before going quiet, leaving behind only a cloud of warmth against my face, the last bit of heat in the room. I steadied my voice and said softly, "That's enough. I don't want to talk anymore." My voice came out dry, thin, brittle as a leaf at the end of its season. Michael looked up. In his eyes flickered something between anger and fear. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. I knew he was holding something back, maybe an apology, maybe another accusation. Sam stepped down a few stairs, slow and heavy. "Please, stop," he said, his voice low and tired. "Claire doesn't deserve to hear any of this, if she were still here." His words cut through the room like a small, sharp blade, light, but deep enough to tear the air apart. Michael turned away, rubbing his face with both hands. I looked at my eldest son, the one who'd always tried to be composed, rational, now looking like a man who had lost something deeper than belief. "You don't understand," I said, forcing my tone back to calm. "When a mother feels her child slipping away, she'll do anything to pull them back." Michael didn't lift his eyes. "But you didn't pull her back, Mom," he said quietly. "You pushed her away." The words landed softly, yet they made me stagger inside. I said nothing,
I just watched the kettle, its thin steam curling upward. The vapor formed pale rings in the air, then vanished, like us, once whole, once close, now fading piece by piece. None of us realized it then, but that was the last time I heard my daughter's name spoken in anger. Claire, that name, that afternoon, became a sound I would never want to hear again. And after that day, no one said it anymore. Not in anger, not in love, only in silence. I left the kitchen, walking through the living room. On the piano, her unfinished score still lay under its closed lid. The house returned to its usual state, orderly, still, but so empty it frightened me. I sat down, fingers laced together. Sam gathered the half-empty cups of tea. Michael stepped onto the porch, lighting a cigarette, the one he'd promised to quit last year. No one spoke. Only the kettle made a faint, rasping sound as it boiled itself dry, wheezing softly before going quiet, like the final breath of a long, exhausted day. I watched the thin smoke drift upward from the spout, twisting, dissolving into the pale afternoon light, and I thought, perhaps every anger begins as love that no one ever acknowledged. And pain, when left unnamed, doesn't die. It just stays, living quietly in the walls of the house.
That morning, dew still clung to the grass when 2 police officers knocked on my door. The sound was soft, polite even, but in my mind it echoed like a funeral drum. I opened the door. The white light outside blurred their outlines, turning them into 2 silhouettes from a dream. The taller one removed his hat and spoke with a quiet, careful tone. "Mrs. Hayes, we have some additional information regarding your daughter Claire's accident." I didn't answer, just nodded and stepped aside to let them in. The house, already small, suddenly felt too full, with the 3 of us and all the memories that hadn't yet settled. The younger officer opened a small notebook and flipped through a few pages. His voice hesitated in midair, as though he was still searching for the right words. "Our investigation's preliminary findings are in. The car's brakes didn't fail. There was no skid. Miss Hayes, she swerved to avoid a pedestrian crossing the road." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "To avoid who?" I asked, though my voice sounded so hoarse it hardly felt like mine. "Mrs. Louise Harper. She lives about 10 miles from here. She used to be a patient at the counseling center where your daughter worked." My fingers gripped the edge of the chair. The room went silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock, marking each second that now separated me from the truth. The officer continued, his voice low. "Claire managed to stop in time. She avoided the woman, but the road was slick. The car spun out." He paused, took a breath. "The pedestrian survived. She's being treated at St. Mary's Hospital." I stood up, taking a few unsteady steps, feeling my body lose its weight. "Thank you," I whispered. They nodded and left. The door clicked shut behind them, and with that single sound, every other in the house disappeared. I walked to the kitchen and leaned against the counter. The morning light spilled through the curtains, drifting across floating dust like slow-moving ash. I closed my eyes, piecing together the details. Claire, her gray scarf, the hum of the engine, the rain that night. All of it leading here, to this moment, when I realized my daughter had died saving someone else. Part of me dissolved right there. The rest of me still refused to believe it. That afternoon, I drove to St. Mary's. The highway stretched ahead, slick and shining, every curve tightening around my chest. When I parked, I kept my hands on the steering wheel, gripping it until the ache forced me to let go. Inside, the sterile air of disinfectant filled my lungs, cold, sharp, unforgiving. A young nurse led me down a corridor and said quietly, "Mrs. Harper is still weak, but she's awake. You can speak to her for a moment." I nodded.
The door opened, releasing a faint smell of metal and sedatives. The woman on the bed was frail, her hair silver, skin pale against the white sheets. A line of clear fluid ran into her hand. Her eyes were closed, lips moving faintly around words too quiet to catch. I stepped closer, not sure how to begin. Finally, I whispered, "I'm Claire Hayes's mother." Her eyes opened, clouded, glistening. She looked at me for a long time before speaking in a voice thin as breath. She said her mother was a good person. Only she forgot how to love. I stood frozen. Each word fell softly, like mist, and yet, when it touched my heart, it shattered. Forgot how to love. I repeated it in my mind, slow, one word at a time. Outside the window, the midday light fell across my face, so bright it hurt. Maybe that was Claire's forgiveness, offered in the only way I could never return. I rested my hand on the rail of the hospital bed and whispered, "Thank you for living." The woman smiled faintly, then closed her eyes. I stepped into the hallway, my legs still trembling. The sound of my shoes echoed down the sterile corridor, hollow, rhythmic, like the background music of an old dream. And in the middle of that new, quiet truth, I could almost hear Claire's piano again, slow and tender, the final note no longer out of tune. I leaned against the wall, hands still shaking. The air smelled of disinfectant, dry, sharp, as if meant to burn away any emotion left inside me. At the end of the corridor, the afternoon light spilled through the window, staining the white tiles with a pale gold that reminded me of our kitchen at home. My throat tightened. I wanted to cry but didn't dare, because I knew, once the tears came, they would never stop. I would cry for every silence I had built, for every word I hadn't said, for the way I mistook control for care, perfection for love. A doctor passed by and nodded, his eyes gentle with pity. I lowered my head, pressed my lips together, tried to steady my breath. In the reflection on the glass wall, I saw myself, hair undone, coat wrinkled, face drained of color. And I recognized that woman. She wasn't the one I used to be, but the mother who now stood somewhere between guilt and forgiveness. Outside, the air was cool, still carrying the damp scent of an earlier rain. The parking lot shimmered with puddles of light. I stood there for a while, letting the breeze brush across my face, letting my heart quiet down. Everything around me began to blur, the cars, the voices, the hum of life itself, until it all became a soft, distant noise. And when I thought of Claire, all the anger inside me fell apart like dust. I no longer felt the need to blame anyone, not her, not myself, not life. I only felt tired and light, as if some door had closed quietly inside me. My daughter hadn't died because of anyone's failure. She died because of kindness, simple, unguarded kindness, expecting nothing in return. And I, who once taught her to be strong and unbreakable, never taught her how to keep a little piece of herself safe. I walked to my car. The door creaked open, the driver's seat covered with a thin layer of dust. I sat down, resting both hands on the steering wheel without turning the key. Ahead, Route 5 stretched through the trees, glowing faintly in the late sunlight. I looked at that road, the place where my daughter turned her wheel to save a stranger and gave her life instead. The wind picked up, swirling dry leaves around me like fragments of memory. I whispered, "You saved someone, Claire, and maybe you saved me too. Because through you,
I've learned that some things can only be seen once they're gone. Because of you, I know now, love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go at the right moment. I turned the key. The engine hummed, low and steady. A song began to play on the radio, an old melody, hauntingly familiar. It sounded just like the piece Claire used to practice. I didn't know if it was coincidence or something else, some message the universe had decided to send, but I didn't turn it off. I drove slowly, past the curve, past the spot where the accident had happened. The road had been repainted, white lines fresh and clean, but the old cracks still showed beneath. I stopped the car, stepped out. Sunlight filtered through the branches and fell across the place where she had once lain. A breeze passed by, lifting the edge of the gray scarf around my neck. I closed my eyes, listening, to the wind, to my heartbeat, to the quiet between breaths. No anger, no pain, only the truth. She died out of kindness, not because of anyone's fault. And I smiled, for the first time since that night, a small, fragile smile. But enough to know Claire was still here, in the wind, in the light, in the rhythm of the rain that was beginning to fall again. That night, the wind rose from the woods, sweeping across the porch and carrying with it the damp scent of pine and fog. The kitchen sat under a weary yellow light. I was still at the table, a cup of tea gone cold in front of me, my eyes unfocused on the fogged-up window pane. The clock ticked steadily, soft, patient, like the slow breathing of the house itself. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, hesitant, and then they stopped at the kitchen door. Sam appeared, holding a half-burned cigarette. Smoke curled upward, thin and fragile in the dim light. His hair was tousled, his eyes swollen, and his whole stance uncertain, as if he hadn't yet decided whether to stay or go. "Mom," he said quietly, "you're still up?" I nodded. Couldn't sleep. He hesitated, stared at the cigarette, then pressed it out in the small dish on the table. The air filled with the sharp, burnt scent of smoke, harsh and lingering. I waited. Sam didn't speak right away. His hands trembled slightly, fingers locking together, then unclasping again. Finally, he exhaled and said, voice rough and breaking, "Claire knew I owed money. She told me not to let you find out." The words dropped into the quiet kitchen like a small stone into still water, not loud, but spreading wide. I looked at my son, saying nothing. In the tired light, his face showed every fracture between fear and guilt. I had never seen Sam like that before. Bare, unguarded, heartbreakingly honest. "How much do you owe?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not much, but I hid it. I thought I could fix it myself. Claire knew, but she didn't tell. She just said—" He paused, took a sharp breath. She said, "Don't tell Mom. She'll worry again." The air in my chest thickened, pressing upward. After a moment, I asked, "How long had she known?" "A few weeks. I promised I'd pay it back, but then everything happened." His voice cracked, then stopped altogether. I didn't say a word. We sat across from each other in the pale light, surrounded by the fading warmth of the tea. Outside, the wind hissed through the cracks in the doorframe, cold enough to sound like the house itself was sighing. Sam lowered his head into his hands. "Mom, if she hadn't gone out that night, if I'd told her sooner, if I'd just—" "Enough, Sam," I cut in softly, but firmly. His eyes lifted, wet, lost. The eyes of someone trying to stay afloat in water too deep. His lips trembled as he tried to keep steady, but his shoulders gave him away. I looked at my son and saw in him the same fear and guilt that had lived in me for years. The feeling of having to keep living with something you can never undo. I understood, not with reason,
but with the instinct of someone who once lost everything by staying silent too long. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him, but my hand stayed flat on the table. Between us, the distance felt like Claire's shadow, no longer there, yet still present, stretching across everything left unsaid. "Sam," I said gently, "sometimes people keep secrets, not because they want to lie, but because they're afraid of losing what little they still have." He looked up, his eyes red in the soft light. "I just didn't want her to carry it anymore," he whispered. "I know," I said. The wind pressed against the porch again. The door gave a soft thud, like someone knocking at the edge of memory. I watched my son, the child who once hid in my arms on stormy nights, now sitting bowed, as if weighed down by a sentence handed down by his own conscience. I wasn't angry. There was nothing left to be angry about, only a strange, quiet loosening inside me, something unknotted, as if Claire herself had reached through the silence to help us breathe again. Sam sat in silence for a long time, head bowed, eyes fixed on the grain of the wooden table. The light above flickered faintly, casting his face in halves, one bright, one shadowed, like a man caught somewhere between guilt and memory. I could hear the clock ticking, each sound striking against my chest like a slow hammer. He swallowed hard, then lifted his head. His voice was small, trembling, but clear. "She died keeping my secret." I froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish in an instant. Every sound, the wind, the rustling trees, even my own breath, disappeared. The sentence was short, simple, and unbearably heavy. "You can't know that for sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I do," Sam whispered. "She said she was going to see a former patient, but really, she went to deliver money for me. Louise, the woman she met that night, that was her. I told Claire I'd pay her back, but she didn't believe me. She was afraid you'd find out, afraid you'd be disappointed in me. So she went." I looked at my son, his shoulders shaking, hands clenched tight, nails digging into his skin. "She said she'd be right back," he continued, voice breaking, "but she never came home." A cold wave crawled down my spine. My hand gripped the edge of the table as if it were the only thing holding me upright. In Sam's eyes, I saw collapse and remorse tangled together. He wasn't the boy who once argued with his brother anymore. He was a man carrying a grief far too heavy for one life. I stood, walked to him. He didn't look up, just sat there, his face hidden in his hands. I placed my palm on his shoulder, then pulled him gently into my arms. For the first time in years, I held my son without a word of reproach. There were no tears, only the shared warmth of two bodies trembling in the same rhythm. I could hear his heart pounding, the weight of his breath against my chest. No one apologized. No one tried to explain. There was only the truth, and within it, a small, quiet kind of forgiveness. "Mom." Sam's voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Shh," I said softly. "It's all right now." His shoulders shuddered once, then eased. The wind outside pressed against the porch again. The door rattled softly, no longer like a cry, but like the weary sigh of a house finally letting itself rest. I ran my fingers through his hair and whispered, "No one wanted this to happen, Sam. Claire doesn't blame you. Neither do I." He nodded, but his tears soaked through my collar. We stood in that silence for a long time, long enough for the tea to go cold, the steam to fade, and the night to turn silver. When Sam finally lifted his head, his eyes were red and hollow, but there was light in them, fragile, yet real. "I'll make it right," he said quietly, "in my own way." I didn't ask how, I simply nodded. Because sometimes, a promise made by someone learning to forgive himself doesn't need to be explained. I sat back down, watching the warm light spread across the table, blurring into the dark lines of the old wood. In that fading glow, I understood something it had taken me a lifetime to learn, that every person carries a sin they never meant to commit. The sin of love expressed the wrong way, the sin of silence, the sin of words spoken too late. And only when we dare to face those sins do they become something gentler, something that teaches us how to love, honestly and softly. I watched Sam climb the stairs, his figure disappearing down the hallway. The door closed behind him, and there I was again, alone with the lamp's dull light and the faint smell of smoke still clinging to the air. The scent of truth, late and painful, but just in time to save what was left.
That morning, a thin veil of mist hung over the pines outside, and the sunlight slipped through the curtains like strands of thread. The kitchen was still, filled only with the soft whistle of the kettle. I was making tea when a knock came at the door. Margaret stepped inside, my closest friend for more than 30 years, the one who had witnessed nearly every turn in my life. She still carried her familiar scent of lavender and faint tobacco smoke, her eyes kind but heavier than usual. "Eleanor," she said softly, "I found something that belongs to you." I wiped my hands on my apron and looked at her. "What is it?" From her bag she pulled out a small silver USB drive, its surface worn smooth. A strip of old tape was stuck across it, marked in fading ink. C.H. "I found it in a storage box at the music center," she explained carefully. "Claire used one of the recorders there. I think she must have forgotten this." I touched the small device with my fingertips. It was cold, light. It felt like holding a breath that had stopped a long time ago. "You should listen," Margaret said. "I don't know what's on it, but it's Claire's voice. I think you'll want to hear it." I stood still. My palms were damp. Since Claire's death, I had avoided every sound that could carry her presence, afraid to hear, afraid to remember, afraid that her voice might vanish again if I did. But in the end, I nodded. "Leave it here. I'll listen." Margaret hesitated, then set the USB gently on the wooden table beside my steaming teacup. "I'll wait in the car," she said, resting a hand on my shoulder before she left. The door closed, and the wind whispered through the cracks. I sat down. Light fell across the small silver drive, gleaming like a sealed memory. I plugged it into the speaker and pressed play. A dry click sounded, followed by silence. Then came the scrape of a chair, the rustle of paper, and after that, a voice so familiar it stopped my heart. "Mom, try that part again. Your right hand's a little slow." I stopped breathing. For an instant, time folded back on itself, to that afternoon when Claire sat beside me at the old piano, her hair tied neatly, her face focused, yet always ready to smile whenever I missed a note. In the recording, I heard my own voice answering, "I can't remember where to come in." And then Claire's laugh, clear, bright, so near I almost turned around, half expecting to see her standing behind me. "You hit the wrong key, Mom. Let me fix it." I could hear the warmth in her tone. No scolding, no instruction, just a gentle correction, the same way she'd speak when I burned a pie or forgot to water the garden. Then came the sound of her fingers touching the keys, soft, certain. The melody was short, still unfinished, but so alive that my heart skipped a beat. I sat there, staring into nothing, listening to my daughter's laughter echo through the empty room.
It wasn't a sound from the past or the present, but from somewhere in between, a place where the departed lingered just long enough to remind you they haven't completely gone. I don't know how long the recording lasted. All I know is that I didn't breathe, didn't blink, afraid that even the smallest movement would shatter it. And when Claire's voice came one last time, barely more than a breath, "Mom." I clenched my hands together, holding myself upright, trying not to collapse under the weight of that single word. In the kitchen, there was no other sound, only her laughter. The most beautiful and the most painful sound I had ever heard. I sat frozen, eyes fixed on the small speaker. Through the soft static of the recording, I heard my own voice respond, hoarse, faint, echoing through the old room. "I'll learn it right someday." Just 4 simple words, yet coming from that cold little speaker, they sounded like they belonged to someone else, someone who once had the chance and never realized it was the last. After that, the piano started again. The first note faltered, then the next followed, and the next, forming a gentle chain of sound. Claire laughed softly in the background, her laughter blending into the melody, so light I almost mistook it for the wind through the window. That sound layered itself over my sigh today. 2 breaths, one from the past, one from the present, woven together into a single rhythm. Not sad, not joyful, just true. I closed my eyes, letting the music guide me. Each note fell like a drop of memory, clear, steady, and salt at the edges. Sunlight spilled through the window, glinting off the small silver drive, making it shimmer like a piece of glass. I reached out and touched it. My fingertips warmed instantly, as if she were there beside me, adjusting my hands on the keys, patient, gentle, wearing that half smile I still carried in my mind. Then, suddenly, the recording stopped. No music, no laughter, only a silence so vivid I could hear my own heartbeat echo through the room. I reached out slowly to stop the playback, but just as my finger touched the button, a faint sound slipped through, the smallest breath, like she had something else to say but ran out of time. I pulled my hand back and let it play out. When the room finally sank into stillness, I sat there for a long while. No more fear, no more torment, only a kind of longing, just enough to keep me still, just enough to stay with her laughter a little longer. I thought then, perhaps Claire knew I would find this recording exactly when I was meant to, when the pain had softened enough for me to bear it, and my heart was still open enough to feel it. So I played it again. "Mom, your right hand's too slow." "Easy for you to say." "You hit the wrong note, let me fix it." And my voice again, "I'll learn it right someday." I laughed through a shaky breath, and then I cried, not from pain, but because I missed that laugh, the clear, effortless sound that once filled this house with life. I let the tears fall, made no effort to wipe them away. Each drop hit the wooden table and spread into a small circle, catching the dim light. In that moment, I understood. Sometimes the presence of the dead doesn't live in the image we keep, but in the sound they leave behind. Something that can exist forever in the air, even after we stop searching for it. Outside, the wind stirred the pine branches, their soft rustle blending with the rhythm of my heart. The house was still, but no longer silent. It carried Claire's voice now, light, distant, and tender as breath returning home. The last morning of spring. Sunlight angled through the window, spilling over the cup of tea in my hands. Steam rose slowly, soft and white, blurring the printed words on the folder before me. Claire Hayes Foundation. I had written my daughter's name thousands of times, on forms, bank drafts, memorial papers, but never had it felt both so heavy and so light. Heavy because I knew it was no longer just a name. Light because, for the first time, I wrote it not out of grief, but out of gratitude. The small foundation began as a whisper, a silent promise I once made to her photograph. I'll finish what you started, the way you did it, quietly, kindly, without waiting for anyone to notice. From the drawer, I took an old envelope. Inside was the first check I ever signed for the fund, my hand trembling as if rewriting a prayer. Beside it lay one of Claire's letters, the one she had written to her very first patient, something I'd kept since the day she left. Her handwriting was round and neat, the words almost childlike. We can't heal everything, but if even one person feels less alone, that's enough. I read it again and again, then slipped it into the folder, as if it were a compass. The first week I went to the community center where Claire used to work, a small room with pale green walls and a wooden desk worn smooth with time. The woman who ran the place smiled when she heard my name. "You're Claire's mother, aren't you? Everyone here remembers her." I could only nod, swallowing against the tightening in my throat. We talked for a long while. I told her about my plan to open a small fund that would provide free counseling for women in hardship, something Claire had dreamed of, but never lived long enough to do. The woman's eyes softened. She placed a hand over mine and said, "If she could see this, she'd be smiling." I smiled back. No, she'd frown first. She always thought she could do more. That afternoon, I walked through the little park beside the center. The sky was gray, the wind carrying the scent of wet grass. A young woman with a notebook in hand stopped me. Her hair was tied up, her smile shy. "Are you Claire's mother?" she asked. I nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then said, voice trembling, "If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here." I looked up. Such simple words, yet they carried the full weight of truth. She told me she had once been deeply depressed, ready to quit school. Claire was the first person who listened without interrupting, without judging. "She told me to just live one more day," the girl said. "Just one more. And I did. Now I'm about to graduate." I couldn't speak. I just watched her, bright eyes, notebook clutched tight, and for a brief, shimmering instant, I saw Claire's reflection in her smile. On the way home, a light drizzle began to fall. I walked slowly, clutching my bag of documents, my heart lighter than it had been in months. Perhaps, in some quiet way, Claire was still doing her work, just from somewhere I couldn't reach. Under the eaves, I stopped, breathing in the scent of damp earth and apple blossoms. It was a peaceful feeling, soft, like her laughter in that old recording. And in that stillness, I understood. Sometimes, people don't truly disappear. They simply change the way they exist in our lives. That evening, before leaving the center, I stood by the glass door. Inside, women sat together in a circle, some young, some older, their faces carrying the faint traces of exhaustion, but already learning how to smile again. Laughter mixed with the sound of paper rustling. The light caught in their eyes, warm and alive, and in that moment, I saw Claire in all of them, not as someone gone, but as something continuing. The same gaze that once belonged to my daughter, the one who listened with her whole heart, who saw others the way we all wished to be seen. And as I realized that, a smile slowly found its way to my face, steady, unbroken. For the first time in months,
I smiled for real.
I left the center just as the rain stopped. The street was scattered with wet leaves, and the late sunlight slanted through the trees, breaking into streaks of gold across the ground. With each step, I felt as though I were walking inside the slow rhythm of a song someone had left unfinished. I whispered, almost without meaning to, "My dear, I'll keep playing the music you never finished." The words dissolved into the air, carried off by the wind, but something inside me shifted, something small, alive, and warm. Not sadness this time, but a pulse of life, steady and quiet. By the time I got home, dusk had fallen. The kitchen was just as it always was, soft yellow light, a clean wooden table, chairs tucked neatly in place. I set the folder down, then sat. On the piano, Claire's unfinished sheet still lay open, the paper yellowed, a few notes blurred with age. I wasn't afraid to touch it anymore. I just placed my hand gently on the page, the way one might touch the face of someone they've missed for a long time. I remembered her saying once, "Music is just a way of saying what words can't." Now I understand. Each of us carries our own melody. Not everyone finishes theirs, but what matters is that we keep playing, even when we fall out of tune. I rose and switched on the kettle, listening to the soft hiss as it began to boil. In that sound, I heard life returning to the house, ordinary, small, but full of meaning. On the wall, the family photograph still hung there, Michael in the middle, Claire tilting her head, Sam smiling just a little. I looked at it for a long time, my eyes resting on my eldest son. He hadn't come home since the memorial. No calls, no letters. But sometimes, at the end of the day, when I checked the foundation's mailbox, there were small donations. No name, just a note. For her melody. I never needed to ask who it was from. Michael hadn't returned, but I knew he was listening, from somewhere quiet, somewhere close. Maybe he was finding his way back into Claire's song, not with his hands, but with the quiet atonement of someone still learning how to love through distance. I don't blame him. Music, like love, needs time for the wrong notes to find their harmony again. I sat down, lifted the piano lid. Light fell across the ivory keys. I pressed one note, then another. The sound was soft but steady, like the house itself exhaling after a long silence. Outside, the wind stirred again. Pine needles brushed against the porch. I thought of Claire, of Michael, of Sam. 3 children, 3 melodies, each different yet part of the same composition. And here I was, with everything that remained of me, still learning how to play it right.
That afternoon the rain came softly. Not a storm, just a steady fall, like someone quietly keeping time on the old roof. I was clearing the table when I heard a car stop outside. The engine cut off. Silence. Then the door opened, closed, and footsteps, slow, certain, a little hesitant, crossed the porch. I didn't turn around right away. I knew that walk. When I finally looked up, Michael stood in the doorway, drenched in his gray coat. The usual sharpness in his face was gone. What remained was something quieter, tired, uncertain. "You're home," I said softly. He nodded but said nothing. The smell of rain clung to him, cold and earthy. In the kitchen, the warm light fell over the empty chair, Claire's chair. Michael stopped there. He didn't sit. He just looked at it. I followed his gaze. The chair was still where it had always been, the floral cushion faded at the corners. No one had touched it since Claire died. It stayed there, untouched, part of the family that no one dared to move. He reached out, brushed his fingers along the wooden edge. His hand trembled. Then, in a voice rough and small, he said, "Mom, I was wrong. I only knew how to blame." The words cracked through the air, gentle but deep, like something splitting open after years of holding still. I didn't answer right away.
The rain tapped softly against the windows. The kettle hissed. Everything in the room, the table, the light, the air, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me. Michael lowered his head, voice shaking. I was angry at you. I thought you always wanted too much. I thought nothing was ever enough for you. But I was wrong. You didn't demand, it was me. I was just afraid I'd never be as good as Claire. I stepped closer. The lines on his face made him look both older and, somehow, like the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. I laid a hand on his shoulder. My palm slowly warmed against the damp fabric. So was I said. He looked up, startled. I smiled, a small, fragile curve that almost didn't make it to my lips. I blamed too, I said. I blamed you for not understanding, blamed Claire for leaving, blamed myself for not holding this family together. But the more I blamed, the less I remembered that sometimes love needs silence to breathe. The room fell still. No more rain, only the sound of our breathing. Slow, unsteady, real. Michael looked at me, then back at the chair. I don't know what to do with this, he said quietly. You don't have to do anything, I replied. Just sit. He hesitated, then pulled the chair out. The wood scraped softly against the floor, a small sound, but it carried far, like a door opening somewhere deep in the house, somewhere in us, that had been closed for a very, very long time. Michael pulled the chair out, hesitated for a moment, then sat down. I took the seat across from him, the wooden table between us, and beside him, the empty chair that once belonged to Claire, stood quietly, like a witness that refused to fade. Two people, two kinds of guilt, sitting down together. For a long while we said nothing. The rain outside kept falling, softer now, turning into a thin layer of mist that clung to the window frame. The kitchen was lit only by the round bulb above us, its glow warm and golden, enough to draw every line on my son's face into quiet relief. The light refracted through a half-empty glass, scattering across the table like glimmers from another time, when we used to eat here together, laughing, before everything began to crack. Michael placed his hands on the table, fingers interlocked, tanned and thin. I could see the effort in his shoulders, the way they tensed as if bracing for something unspeakable. I knew that feeling. We were both afraid to touch the wound, afraid that one word might break the fragile stillness holding us together. Then, from the stove, the kettle began to hum. A soft, steady sound, unhurried, like the house itself exhaling after a long storm. I stood and poured the water into the teapot. Steam rose in slow spirals, drifting between us, thin, weightless, dissolving like memory. That mist hung there for a second, then disappeared, the way pain does when it finally grows tired of itself. I slid a cup toward him. Drink. It's still warm. Michael took it, both hands around the porcelain, and breathed in deeply before whispering, I don't know how to start again, Mom. No one does, I said. You just sit down and wait to see what happens. We stayed like that, quiet, the scent of tea mingling with the damp pine air from outside. I looked at my hands, thin, veined, still trembling slightly. These were the hands that had tried to hold everything and lost it all. Michael's eyes moved to the chair beside him, the one where Claire used to sit, her head resting on his shoulder during that last birthday dinner. His voice dropped, small, as if afraid to disturb the room. I wish I'd said something different that night. Maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. I placed my hand on the table, close to his, and shook my head gently. We can't change what we said, Michael. But we can change the way we stay silent. He looked at me for a long moment, as though something inside him finally eased. A slow breath passed between us, warm,
unforced. In that kitchen there was no longer a line between a mother's grief and her son's. Only two people, sharing the same hollow space, a little less heavy than before. No apologies, no explanations, just the quiet. I watched the steam fade over the table and felt, for a fleeting second, as if Claire was there in that thin veil of air. Not far, not gone, just close enough to be seen. And I understood them. Forgiveness doesn't begin with words, or even with tears. It begins with the simple act of sitting down together, in the emptiness of what's been lost, seeing one another without flinching, and hearing each other breathe in place of everything we never said. Outside, the rain had stopped. A pale line of light slipped through the window, resting on the table where 2 cups of tea still steamed. I looked at Michael, and for the first time, the reflection in his eyes wasn't anger or blame. It was the quiet look of a son who had finally found his way home. The summer afternoon moved slowly, like the rhythm of breathing. Sunlight slanted through the window and spread across the old piano, laying a thin, golden veil of dust over the keys. I stood there for a moment before sitting down. Michael and Sam were already waiting, one on each side, silent, as if preparing for something greater than music. The piano had been cleaned, but the scratch on its corner remained, the one Claire once laughed about. "When we fix it, don't cover this mark, Mom. It's a memory." I never did. I never could. On the music stand lay her unfinished sheet. The paper had yellowed, its edges curled, a few spots of ink blurred, traces of her hands, of time, of a promise that never found its end. I looked at the uneven lines of the staff, trembling faintly, almost alive. One note had been crossed out and rewritten, as if Claire had hesitated before letting it stay. Maybe she, too, had been afraid of playing the wrong one, just like I was now. Michael sat on my left, his hands resting on the bass keys. Sam sat on my right, the old wooden guitar balanced on his knee, plucking softly to check the tuning. And I sat between them. For the first time in a long while, the 3 of us were together at that piano, the one that used to belong to just me and Claire. No one spoke. Sam met my eyes and gave a small nod. Michael drew in a breath and said quietly, "You start, Mom." I nodded. My fingers touched the first key, cold but no longer distant. The sound came out fragile, dry, as if the instrument itself was trying to remember the way home. We began to play. The first note trembled. The second one missed. Michael struck the wrong chord, Sam plucked late, and I forgot where the refrain began. The melody stumbled, broke apart, but kept going. Then someone laughed. I don't know who it was. Maybe me, maybe Sam, maybe Michael. And just like that, we all stopped and laughed together. A soft, breathy kind of laughter, awkward and real. It lingered in the room, light enough for even the wind to pause and listen. Sam grinned. Again. She'd scold us if she knew we gave up this fast. I smiled, still laughing under my breath. Michael exhaled slowly, as if setting down something he'd carried for years. So we tried again. Wrong, then right. Offbeat, then found again in each other's eyes. Each note, each breath was a conversation without words. Michael's chords grew steadier. Sam's guitar hummed low and tender. My piano, still shaky, followed along. We weren't playing Claire's music exactly, but I knew, somewhere, somehow, she was listening, smiling, counting time with us. The light slanted deeper through the window, brushing across 3 faces. 3 people who had once lost one another,
now fitting into the same frame again. And in that uneven, imperfect sound, something small and alive returned. A family, a quiet faith, a song finally finding its way home. The music filled the room, blending with our breathing, 3 rhythms folding into one. No one counted. No one watched the notes. We simply listened to each other. The sounds overlapped, wandered, came apart, then met again, like a stream curling around stones, finding its course no matter how it turned. Michael tilted his head slightly, focused but calm. Sam leaned forward, his fingers brushing the strings in time with his tapping foot. And I pressed the higher keys, letting the melody lift, little by little, toward the light. No one gave a signal, yet somehow we all knew when to slow down, when to stop, as if there were a 4th person among us unseen, quietly keeping time inside our hearts. I took a slow breath, my fingers hovering over the final key. Then I pressed it, firm but gentle. The sound rose, lingered, and faded into the air, carrying with it one shared breath from all 3 of us. In that moment, everything stilled. No mistakes, no perfections. Just a silence so complete, it felt like the perfect punctuation to a song that had waited far too long to be finished.
I looked up at my sons. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed, lips trembling slightly, but the corner of his mouth curved into a quiet smile. Sam sat upright, eyes bright, his hands still resting on the strings. No one spoke, yet their gazes met, and in that meeting, I saw something I thought we had lost forever. A family no longer hiding inside its own guilt. I laughed softly, my voice rough, more like a whisper meant for myself. "We didn't play it right," I said, "but at least we played it together." Both of them looked up and laughed. A real laugh this time, open and warm, echoing through the room that had known only the ticking of a clock for far too long. I closed the piano lid, my hand still trembling slightly. Under the soft light, the wood gleamed faintly, reflecting the shapes of the 3 of us sitting side by side. Not perfect, never needed to be, just here. Sam smiled, a slow, gentle smile, but different this time. Something in him had shifted. On the table, the ashtray sat empty. The cigarette he once reached for whenever he was lost wasn't there tonight. I said nothing, just touched his shoulder lightly. He looked at me and murmured, "I'm learning to play it right, Mom." I understood. He didn't mean the music, he meant life. A breeze slipped through the open door, stirring the white curtain. The scent of pine mixed with warm tea, blending softly with our breath. In the corner, Claire's chair was still empty, but it no longer looked lonely. It seemed to listen, quietly smiling after the concert's end. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the sounds fade. The wind, our breathing, the last echo of the melody we'd just finished. No more fear of playing wrong, no need for words to make things right. Only life, simple, steady, and true. And I thought, perhaps this was the quartet Claire had wanted to write. Not for instruments, but for us. A song that never needed every note to be correct. Only the willingness of those who loved one another to stay and to listen all the way to the end. A full year had passed since Claire left, and once again the house carried the scent of food drifting from the kitchen. I baked an apple pie and cooked her favorite chicken stew, not as a ritual of mourning, but as a way to keep the warmth lingering in this kitchen a little while longer. Outside, the early autumn breeze brushed against the windows. Afternoon light spilled across the dining table, neatly set. White tablecloth, old porcelain dishes, chipped teacups. Everything looked almost exactly as it had on her last birthday dinner, except for one thing. The chair was still empty. I hadn't moved it. None of us had. The chair where Claire used to sit, right beside Sam, stayed in its place, a silent rest note in the family's song, one that no one could replace. On the chair, I laid her gray scarf, freshly washed, neatly folded. Not as a memorial, but as a quiet way of saying, "You're still here. You just don't need to sit anymore." Michael arranged the food, and Sam brought out a small bottle of wine. No one said the words anniversary or death. We simply called it Claire's dinner. No flowers, no prayers, no tears. No one cried. We just told stories. Michael spoke first. "Remember how she used to make you bake early every year, and then by midnight half the pie was gone?" I laughed. "She said it tasted better after cooling, that the apple flavor set in. It was just an excuse to eat more." Sam added, "And to blame me. You'd always ask, 'Sam, did you sneak a bite?'" We all laughed, soft, genuine laughter. The kind I thought I'd never hear again in this house. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It had lightened, like tea that had cooled, still warm, but no longer burning. Sam raised his glass slowly, his eyes resting on the empty chair. "She'd probably be frowning right now." I tilted my head, smiling. "Why do you think that?" "Because she hated when people talked too much during meals," Sam said with a hint of mischief. Michael chuckled. "She didn't hate it, she just pretended to. She always tried to look more serious than she really was." I looked at my two sons, so different, yet softened by time. Michael still steady, measured, Sam still playful. But between them something had shifted, a gentleness, a maturity, not born of age, but of loss. There were no arguments tonight, only a quiet understanding, the kind that grief sometimes leaves behind as its only gift. I sat back and listened to them talk, their voices weaving through the soft clink of cutlery and the faint pour of wine. Sometimes it's the silence of the one who's gone that teaches the living how to speak honestly to each other. Steam rose from the stew, mingling with the scent of baked apples, spreading warmth through the room. I watched it curl upward, dissolve, then drift toward the light falling over Claire's chair. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, calm in a way I hadn't been in a long time, because I knew that if she were here, she'd probably say, in that half-serious, half-teasing tone of hers, "Mom, stop staring. Eat while it's still warm." We sat around the table, the soft clink of forks on porcelain, the slow pour of wine, sounds that breathed like a quiet rhythm of life. Michael stared into his glass for a long time, turning it gently in his hand. Then, unexpectedly, he stood up. The kitchen light caught his face, carving out features older than his years, and in his eyes, no more distance, no more guarded walls, only a calm brightness, the kind that comes when a person has finally learned how to let go. Michael raised his glass, his voice low but steady, to the one who taught us how to say, "I'm sorry." I looked up. The room fell completely silent. Sam nodded softly, eyes glistening, and lifted his glass too. "For Claire," he whispered. The three glasses touched, a clear, delicate sound, like the final note of a harmony at peace with itself. The wine met my lips, sharp at first, then warm, spreading down my throat. I looked at my sons and saw that their shoulders had eased, their eyes gentler. The room, still scented with old wood and pine, felt strangely new, a quiet, no longer colored by mourning, but by gratitude. I turned toward Claire's photograph on the shelf, She was wearing her cream sweater, her hair tied neatly back, smiling in that small, careful way that always made people feel seen without being overwhelmed. I looked at her, and my heart was calm. I remembered how it felt, that first day without her, as if someone had removed a part of my body without leaving a trace of blood. Everything in the house was coated with the dust of memory, the piano, the teacups, the curtains. But now, sitting between my two sons, between real laughter and the soft light spilling through the window, I understood something. She had never truly left this house. Claire was here still, in the way Sam told stories, in Michael's quiet pauses, in every breath shared around this table. And when I looked at her chair, still in its old place, I no longer saw emptiness. That chair had become a held note, a place where silence was no longer sorrow but the lingering part of music. Outside, wind slipped through the frame, carrying the damp scent of dry grass. Leaves brushed gently against the eaves. I leaned back, watching the steam rise from my cup of tea, curling into thin, silver spirals that faded into the air. And I thought, maybe memory isn't pain anymore. Maybe it's where love decides to stay. I understood then why Claire once said, music is memory that knows how to sing. Because when we truly forgive, even the past turns into melody, no longer a wound, just a soft note that sometimes touches the heart, but no longer frightens it. I lifted my glass toward her picture. No words, no tears, only a long, quiet gaze, a promise carried in silence, that from now on, love would be the only thing we keep. Michael and Sam kept talking on the other side of the table, their laughter blending with the wind outside. I nodded slightly, smiling, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a hand rest gently on my shoulder, warm and familiar. Perhaps it was only the breeze, or perhaps it was Claire. The following spring, the Vermont sky was startlingly clear and high. Morning lights streamed through the kitchen window, glinting off the fresh coat of paint on the walls. Michael was repainting the old kitchen. White t-shirt speckled with color, brush in hand, sweat beading on his forehead. The sound of the brush dragging over plaster was dry but warm, a small rhythm belonging to someone learning how to begin again. I stood by the doorway, watching. The walls, once gray and damp from winter, were turning slowly into a soft cream touched with morning gold. Michael said, "I think the kitchen should have the color of a new day. Claire would have liked that." I nodded without replying, my heart slowing a little. Each stroke of his brush seemed to lift away a thin layer of dust from memory, not to erase it, but to let the house breathe again. I looked at my son, the one who had once folded into silence beneath the weight of loss, now steady, focused, tending even to corners no one else would notice. There was something tender in that, an unspoken gentleness that said more than any words could. Across the room, Sam was playing the guitar. The notes were light, bright, like sunlight scattering across the strings. Not Claire's unfinished piece, not any familiar song, just a few improvised chords, full of the air of a new morning. He looked up and called out, "Careful! If you get paint on my strings, you're cleaning them yourself." Michael laughed, the sound rich and easy, filling the kitchen with something that had been missing for too long, simple, living warmth. I let them be, their laughter echoing behind me, and stepped into the smaller kitchen space. I began to make Claire's favorite, apple pie. The recipe was still the same: flour, sugar, cinnamon, green apples, and a bit of butter. I sliced the apples thin, their crisp, tart scent mingled with the smell of new paint and Sam's distant guitar. There was something about that moment, that mix of sound and scent that made everything feel as if it were finally finding its place again. Not perfect, but alive. I sprinkled cinnamon over the top, remembering the way Claire would lean on the counter, chin in hand, watching me bake. "Mom, not too much cinnamon," she'd say, laughing. "It'll drown out the apples." I always added a little extra just to tease her, and I did the same today, only a pinch more than she would have allowed. Then I smiled. "This time," I whispered. "I listened, sweetheart." The oven clicked softly. The smell of warm apples and butter began to drift through the house. Michael turned, breathing in. "That smell. That's Claire," he said quietly, but with certainty. Sam stopped playing, grinning. "She'd probably say, 'You two better clean up after all this painting.'" I laughed, a real laugh this time, easy and unbroken, like someone had opened the window to let new air in. Sunlight poured through the window, spilling across the photo of Claire on the shelf. In the picture, she was smiling, eyes turned slightly to something beyond the frame, toward the place, I liked to think, where she could see us now, and finally rest easy. The scent of apple pie filled the room as I opened the oven. Warm air rose, drifting through the freshly painted kitchen, blending with the sunlight that fell across my daughter's photograph. The frame sat on a small wooden shelf by the window, the very spot where Claire used to sit and read on rainy afternoons. Light touched her cheek in the picture, and for a moment, her smile seemed to awaken, not near, not far, just close enough to make my heart tremble. I set the tray of pie on the table. Michael washed his hands, and Sam kept strumming the guitar, a simple tune weaving between the birdsong outside. The light in the house began to shift, from gold to white, from warm to clear, as if the walls themselves were learning how to breathe again after years of holding their breath. Michael sat down and spoke quietly. "You know, Mom, I used to feel empty every time sunlight came through this window, but now I just feel calm." I looked at him, his shoulders no longer hunched, his voice no longer guarded. Sam glanced up and smiled. Probably Claire, standing out there somewhere, adjusting the light for us. We all laughed, softly, but real. The house filled with the sound of laughter, no longer afraid of silence. That sound moved through the room, Sam's laugh, Michael's steady breath, the quiet ring of a spoon against a teacup. I never knew peace could have a sound. I looked at my two sons, men who had once been distant, angry, silent for too long, now talking about small, ordinary things, paint colors, a new melody, the flavor of apple pie. No one spoke of loss, and no one needed to, because somehow everything unsaid was already gathered in the light. I poured more tea and set the cup down, the wood giving a small, soft creak beneath it. The sunlight moved again, gliding across the table, over my hands, then resting on Claire's photograph. I looked up. The frame no longer felt like something from the past. It felt present, alive, part of this very room. And suddenly, I remembered something Claire once told me. "You know, Mom, light only exists because darkness gives it something to shine on." I'd smiled back then, not thinking much of it. But now, in this sunlit kitchen, I understood. I exhaled slowly, looking around. The newly painted walls, the open doors, the curtain moving with the wind. These had once been places that held sorrow, and now they were full of life again. I thought, maybe light is just darkness that's been forgiven. Forgiven for the days we closed our hearts, for the things we couldn't save, for the time it took us to turn the light back on. I took a slice of pie, the apple still warm. Michael smiled at me.
Sam played a few soft chords, the melody fading gently into the air. I looked up at Claire's picture, the sunlight still resting on her face, bright and calm, close enough that I could smile now without tears. Outside, the pine branches swayed. The wind carried a quiet warmth through the doorway. And in that moment I realized this little house no longer feared the dark, because it had finally learned how to hold the light, just as we had learned, at last, how to love one another without losing each other again. I sat alone in the kitchen as the light outside slipped away. Autumn again. That kind of season where the sun leaves early and the darkness seems to know how to linger. On the table, a few candles flickered gently, their flames tilting in the thin draft sneaking through the doorframe. Their glow wasn't bright, just enough to cast small circles of trembling light across the wooden surface. Warm, quiet, real. I set the table slowly, almost like a ritual. A white cloth, a teacup, a porcelain plate, the silverware aligned just as I used to. At the center, I placed an apple pie, its scent of cinnamon and butter rising softly, like a familiar breath. It had been a long time since I'd set a table for one, not out of loneliness, but because I wanted to sit, really sit, with memories that no longer frightened me. Beside me, one chair remained empty, Claire's chair, the same one, the same faded floral cushion worn thin at the edges. But tonight, when I looked at it, I didn't feel the hollow ache anymore, no chill creeping up my spine, because now my heart was full of memory, full of forgiveness, full of the small, steady sounds of life returning. The clock ticked softly, the wind stirred the curtain, the wood cracked faintly with the change in weather. Sounds that once made me sad, now oddly comforting. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest, and closed my eyes. Then, from upstairs came a melody, soft, slow, so familiar my heart skipped a beat. Claire's song, the one she'd written years ago, the one she had promised to finish, the one I hadn't dared to listen to since. Sam was playing it, his notes drifting down through the ceiling, not perfect, not polished, but true. Each sound trembled slightly, some falling off tempo, but every small mistake carried the breath of love. The boy who once hid behind silence, who used to smoke in the dark, was now using his hands to finish his sister's song. I sat still, listening as the music floated down through the wooden beams, settling around the table, weaving itself into the scent of warm pie. Every note pulled me gently back, to the image of Claire at the piano, hair falling over her brow, to Sam sitting in the doorway, pretending not to watch, to me, standing at the stove, hiding a smile. Now the melody wasn't a song of grief anymore. It was an answer. No longer asking why, no longer heavy, just a circle, whole, complete, and right on time. The candles flickered, their reflections trembling in the glassware, dancing in rhythm with the song, as if in quiet agreement. I didn't know if Sam meant for me to hear it, but I think some part of this house did. It knew that tonight belonged to Claire, and to the peace she'd left behind. I placed my hand over my heart and smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the emptiness with words, or memories, or tears, because I finally understood. Music is how the ones we've lost remind us they were never truly gone. Outside the door, the autumn wind moved through the pines. Leaves fell slowly, brushing the window pane with a faint sound, like a greeting whispered from far away. The music upstairs began to fade, softer and softer, until it dissolved into the quiet. And I sat there, between candlelight, the scent of apples, and the lingering melody inside my chest, receiving the moment as if it were a gift. I stayed that way for a long time, listening as each note slipped into the stillness. The last tone lingered, slightly off, yet tender, like the exhale of someone who has finally kept a promise. The candle flickered,
its light dancing over the table before resting on Claire's photograph. In that breath of silence, I closed my eyes and whispered, "You're home, aren't you?" No answer came, yet somehow the house seemed to breathe with me, the air softening, warming, alive again. I heard the faintest sounds, the wood expanding, wind curling through the doorframe, and, somewhere in between, a quiet laugh, distant but clear. I didn't open my eyes. I was afraid that if I looked, it would vanish. So I let myself sink into the feeling, that gentle nearness, as if Claire were here, not in body, but in the quiet kindness that filled every pocket of light in the room. Outside, rain began to fall. Not hard, not hurried, just a fine rhythm of drops brushing the roof, the pine branches, the earth. A delicate song, a little sad, but peaceful. I listened to it the way one listens to an old lullaby, or the sound of their own heartbeat returning after years of holding still. When I opened my eyes, the porch light spilled onto the wet ground. Raindrops shimmered like 1,000 tiny notes scattered across the earth. I thought, maybe the sky was singing someone home, or maybe it was singing for me, the one who stayed behind, but no longer felt lost. For the first time, absence didn't ache. It made me grateful. I stood and blew out the candle. The smoke curled upward, a thin white ribbon rising into the air, dissolving gently, like the last breath of something that had burned so long just to keep me warm. I watched it go, then smiled. A smile that didn't hide the tears, but didn't need to wipe them away either. I understood now. Every loss has the shape of love. It just takes time to recognize it. The house that was once heavy with silence now breathed with life again. The empty chair was no longer a symbol of what was missing, but a place where memory could sit beside me without breaking me open. I poured the last of the tea into my cup and drank it. It was cool, but steady, honest. Then I sat once more, looked toward Claire's picture, and whispered, "You know, sweetheart, I kept my promise. I carried on your music, not perfectly, but enough for it to keep playing." Outside, the rain went on, a lullaby for the heart returning home. Drops gathered on the glass, sliding down in blurred trails.
In their rhythm, I could almost hear them all. Claire, Thomas, the years that had never known rest, now lying quietly, as if a long, unfinished symphony had finally found its ending. I looked around the kitchen, the soft light from the ceiling lamp falling across the table, the empty chair, the folds of my aging hands. Everything was simple, still, and so achingly real. I wished I could hold this moment forever. Then I took a deep breath, and in that breath I spoke the final words, the ones this whole story had been leading me toward. I don't tell this so anyone will pity me. I tell it so that those who've been broken might know they can still stand again, with a heart that hasn't shattered completely. Those words weren't for Claire, or for Michael, or for Sam. They were for everyone who has ever sat alone in a quiet room, believing they could never begin again. Because now I know, sometimes all it takes is the courage to light a single candle, and that is enough for the light to find its way back. Outside, the rain had softened. I looked up and saw the sky parting, a pale shimmer breaking through the clouds, as if someone had just opened a door to let the moonlight spill across my window. And I smiled, one last time that night, not because I had forgotten the pain, but because at last I had learned how to live with it, in peace. And just like that, the story of Eleanor and the Hayes family comes to a close. Thank you, truly, for walking with us through this long, quiet journey of love, loss, and healing. Wherever you are on your own path, I hope you'll always find a little light, even in the darkest moments, and discover strength in the simple grace of forgiveness. Which moment or character spoke to you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your reflections in the comments below. If stories of healing and human connection are what you seek, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon so we can keep walking together through more meaningful journeys to come. Wishing you a gentle, peaceful day ahead.